and welcome to the second ever episode of Back to Basics with Ross, and obviously this time with Rich. Thank you, Rich, for coming along for part two. We have got a lot to crack on with this time round, but not quite as much as last time. One thing you will notice though is my beastie is not painted, whereas Rich's has got the paint on. Both of these needed reprinting. That's my fault. I stored them somewhere safe, wasn't quite as safe as I thought, and they got broken. In the process of repainting them ready for the part two and the next step, we made a decision between us that actually we're going to leave mine just primed, because what I will show you is how easy it is to use the speed paints, and we can compare it to the triad system, where we can use the contrast of the zenithal priming with the black and white showing the contours versus using triad system, which you can see on Rich's Giant. Before we get started with speed painting our tiefling here, we have to have a quick chat about the airbrushes. Last time, you'll remember, Rich used the custom CS. That's the Vault custom that was especially designed to adapt the already very popular Eclipse CS. Larger cut, extra cutaway for access to the needle for quicker clean throughs and cleaning. And I used the HP B+, which is still my favourite airbrush to use for model painting because it has the 0.2 needle and nozzle and a smaller cup, which makes colour changing and cleaning through a lot quicker. Today, however, we are going to use two different airbrushes. Okay, Richard, the airbrush you've chosen is the HP BH. This is similar to the CH, which I believe you use.
Yes. Very nice little bit of kit both times. This one as well. Very comfy to use. Lovely, sleek, small cup. Love it.
The key differences between the BH and the CH, other than the size of the cup, it also has a 0.2 needle and nozzle set, as opposed to the 0.3 on the CH. This allows for a much finer line. Coupled with the micro air control valve, or MAC valve, just at the front near the nozzle, means that you've got it even closer to hand. On a lot of the other airbrushes that we use a MAC valve on the airline, which is a lot easier to use if you don't already have one built into the airbrush. I have chosen the Sparmax Max 4. A lot of people look at Sparmax and go, that's just a cheap airbrush if you can't afford an Iwata. And to a certain degree, that is correct, because if you can afford an Iwata, I would always recommend an Iwata. However, it's not the be-all and end-all. Sparmax are owned and operated by the same parent company as Iwata, which means you are still getting a very precision, high-end piece of kit, but on a slightly lower budget. It's made in the same way, just using slightly lower spec parts. But actually, with the Max 4, I'll be able to show you that even with a 0.4 needle and nozzle set on a slightly cheaper airbrush, the comparison being this one retails at about £72, whereas the BH retails at about £365. So there's a definite difference there. You will definitely see a difference in the performance, but ultimately it's about how you put those bits of kit to use. And we'll hopefully be able to demonstrate that clearly to you shortly. We've seen the airbrushes. We've explained about the paints that we're going to be using today. Obviously, we still have the triad system here with the War Paints Air that we're both going to be using some of. And I'm going to be using the majority speed paints, getting this guy covered so you can see the difference in part one to part two with that zenithal covering that you get from the triad system versus the zenithal covering you get from a zenithal prime and some speed paints on top, so you can really see those contrasts coming through. But as you've already got your triad done, well, your triad plus one, I should say, just for the benefit of the people watching who may not have already watched through part one, and if you haven't watched part one, pause this video, go back, watch part one, and then come back, because then a lot of the things we'll discuss will make a bit more sense. So I'm just going to wait for you to do that now. Welcome back if you've paused and come back to us from watching part one first, and thank you for staying with us if you didn't. With our Giant here, what are your plans for the next stages of paint?
Okay, so plans for the next stage, obviously having gone with the triad system and tried to do the lighter parts and the highlights in the more lit areas. I will be double checking them and seeing if I maybe need to mix in a slight bit of white with the high paint, just to give it that extra sort of brightness on a few key places, and to check the under lighting as well to make sure the shadow is all right, and maybe if need be add a slight bit of paint in there. But then after that, I think it's going to be down to the paintbrushes.
Lovely. So a little bit more on the airbrush just to bring out those details, maybe just doing a little bit of colour blocking on some of the areas, like with the leather and the wood on his I want to say clothes, but they're barely clothes, they're doors and a bit of cloth.
So yeah, we've not got much in the way of the cloth adornments and bits and pieces, but we have got some blotches in the flesh, so I might even try and go over with a bit of a blotchy colour to add something to the flesh there.
So we'll be able to have a little look and see how that takes shape. And as Rich touched on there, as well as doing the airbrushing related areas of painting, there will be an additional part where we'll be going through the finishing touches using the paintbrushes rather than airbrushes. Because as we mentioned at the start of the first part, we're not precision experts. We're not going to be able to get really fine detail with the airbrushes. We could get pretty close. Won't be able to get quite as much detail with the airbrush as you can with a standard airbrush. Well, at least we can't. So we'll be doing some final finishing with paintbrushes, which will also be courtesy of the Army Painter paintbrush range, which I'll explain in more detail when we get to it. So let's get painting. Some painting. So I have the speed paint. This one is Slaughter Red. It's a very, very vibrant red, but it's also got those real darks. You can see on the front, depending on the highlight underneath, you will get a different shade, much in the same way that the triad system works. The great thing with the speed paints is they are a lot more fluid than the air paints or the Fanatics from Army Painter, so you don't generally need to thin them, but always check whenever you're putting paint into the cup of your airbrush, always check that the fluidity is sufficient to get through your nozzle. This one is going to be fine. Do a quick check on my cloth here. That's coming out beautifully. So what I'm going to do is in the same way that I did with the triad system with the base, but just being careful as I'm going around it to bring out those contours. And the great thing with a 0.4 nozzle is while it is a larger one, you have got a lot more range of motion when it comes to just being a little bit more finessed, so you don't have quite so much overspray as you otherwise would on something, say, like the Iwata CR, which is a 0.5mm needle and nozzle. Now we're going to be fairly conservative with our coverages here, because a lot of what we're going to be doing, it won't matter too much that there's a little red undertone to it. If anything, that will add to what we'll be doing with the main coverage. One thing I forgot to do last time, which I will do this time, is spray on the hands. Because the hands matter just as much as all the others. But I do appreciate Rich not just picking it up, but making a point of taking the mick out of me for forgetting during his spray. So getting some of the edges on his body and the contours around there. So as you can see, even with the coverage, I've only used the one colour. I've just been a bit more gentle in areas. You can see that it's actually got highlights, lowlights and background bases from just the one cover and one colour. I am going to go back over a couple of the bits a little more heavily, just to really bring out those contours, because it's always better to be gentle at first and then go over with a bit more second time around than go over too much too soon, and then you're having to either quickly wipe it off or wait for it to dry and re-spray a primer on it. So just making sure I've got those bits covered. Now I left the face on purpose because this is the bit where I'm going to dial it back a smidge. Again, using my micro air control valve, dial the air back so it's not sending quite so much out, which means you've got a little bit more control and you can get in a little bit closer when putting paint onto your model. So then you can see there you've got more control and less overspray. And you turn it back up to do the bigger blocks. And there we have the reason for them being called speed paints is for just that. You've got a zenithal coverage with one coat of paint.
So what I'm doing is I'm adding a very, very, very small amount of Celtic red to the airbrush cap, and I'm
so the Celtic red, that's what you used as your base base.
That was my very base tone. And what I'm going to do is with the airbrush medium, I'm going to literally water it down to even lighter than a shade.
So making it more of a wash.
Making it much more of a wash to literally come from underneath and hit some of the undertones just to sort of put a bit of shadow back. Now, carefully on this one with the bubble back.
Again, with those bubble backs, it's generally recommended to use a cloth when doing the bubble back, unless you know exactly how far the needle will protrude from the needle cap.
Which luckily I do, because I checked very carefully so I don't bend the tip of the needle with my finger.
Which is exactly the point. It's much easier to get a cloth than it is to replace your needle if you bend the tip accidentally with your finger when doing your bubble backs. So remind me again what you're doing with that wash that you've put on there.
So with this wash, I'm just going from underneath just to add some of the little bits of shading back, or shadows back I should say as well. It was pretty good with the previous layers, as it were, with the colour triad, but this just adds apparently that extra bit of depth that we're hoping for, a little bit of extra shade, and if you happen to have gone a little bit zealous over some of the lighting areas, like I have, it helps just to sort of dull a couple of the little bits down and give you an appearance of a little bit more depth. And also then in areas where you've got nice big strong ridges, you can add into those ridges the shade. It's also a good place to get a little bit of extra shading into the hands, because obviously I always find the palms sometimes get a little bit of neglect.
You had to bring up the hands again, didn't you? You just had to.
It's not my fault. And obviously another one is those lovely sexy giant toes. Careful on the air. Yeah, just a little bit in to the rib cage. What we will do is we will use our lovely little adjuster here. We do it the right way. Slow down the airflow. And we are going to get the nice ridges on his little gut here. Just a brief little bit, and in his old wee belly button.
One thing to mention again, if you aren't lucky enough to have an airbrush with a micro air control valve attached, which most airbrushes don't, you can buy them separately, which we do sell here at the Airbrush Company. Anything we've used today I will post links to. You can buy all of your war paints, air and your speed paints, as well as a variety of the other things we'll be using today throughout this video, and the links will be in the comments later.
Once I'm happy with that, my intention then is to go back with the high. So this is the Wildling Flesh, and then I'm also going to add in a little bit of matte white just to bring it up that little bit more for the very last highlights.
As Rich is doing there, a very clear demonstration of the triad system from Army Painter is a guide, not a must. If you want to add whites or blacks or mix the shades together or do whatever you want, then absolutely do it, because ultimately you want your model to look how you want it to look. If you need to be a bit creative with the mix, if you need to be a bit creative with adding elements to your paints, or even chucking a different colour wash over just to add an extra pigment to his skin, you do whatever you find works, because ultimately, if it works for what you need it to do, then it's the right thing to do.
And again, carefully around his gut, just to give it some of the little nice places that will catch the light that little bit more, and just to give a little bit more depth to the model. Highest points. Make sure everything is flowing okay through that.
So while Rich just finishes that bit up, we're going to go back to my tiefling, and I'm going to stick a bit of colour on his hair, horns and leather. So while Rich is doing his extra bits of shading on his giant, I'm going to add now some colour to a few of the other areas. So what I'm going to do first is, with the Satchel Brown speed paint, I'm going to actually paint a few of the bits with the Satchel Brown to begin with. So first, Satchel Brown over the fur on the back and on the leather at the bottom, and then put Grim Black over the top on the fur, and then put a slight dark skin shade, which is this one here, a bit of dark skin shade over the leather to bring out the fleshy nature of leather. And we'll see if that works. So first things first, a bit of this one in there. So this is the Satchel Brown speed paint. So get a bit of coverage here. Again, the leather here and here, as well as the fur, will all get some of the brown coverage. And you can be fairly liberal, because again, because you've got a zenithal covering, you can be quite liberal with it, because where it's darker on the zenithal colouring, it will come up darker, and where it's lighter with the zenithal covering, it will be lighter. So again, because I'm doing a lot of the leather work, I don't have to worry too much about overspray. And any of the areas that are slightly oversprayed, when we come to doing the brush, that is when we can really focus on the fine detail work. And even though this is a 0.4 nozzle on the Swabar Max 4, all you need to do is just check where your spray line is, and then just go making sure that that goes at the bottom of where you're spraying, or the top, depending on where you're going with your line. So then you can avoid overspray by just spraying to the edge of where you need to paint. Just have a quick check there. Right, I'm going to turn this around without dropping it and breaking it again. I say again, breaking this one as well. Just being very mindful as you go around to make sure that you avoid overspray as much as possible, again, at this stage, we are just colour blocking. If there is a little bit of overspray, that can be fixed with a paintbrush. But I think I'm not doing too badly as far as avoiding the overspray. So I'm happy with that. Going to give that a second, and then I'm going to do the leather work on his, it's a skirt really, isn't it? I am coming to the end of what I've got on here, so I'm going to just have to pop him down and add a touch more. It's always better to maximise the life of your paints. It's always better to add a little bit and then have to add more than to have too much and end up throwing loads of it away. So I'm going to go on here, I want to say the belt buckle, but it's more of a sporran really, isn't it? I'm going to do that in a pallid bone and put a bit of dark shading on it to really bring that out. So I'm not going to worry about a little bit of overspray with the brown, because that will just bring out the darker tones on the bone colour. So as you can see there, this looks pretty well covered. With the horns, I'm going to leave them with the slight red overspray from the head. I will do a bit of pallid bone there, and then I will do a dry brush blend again with a hand paintbrush. I think I would probably do similar on the textured section here as I do on the face mask.
Yeah, do the black and grey sort of thing for that.
And then I'll do a metallic on the sword. So we'll just dump that bit out, and I'll just get a little bit of water in, because I want to take most of the dark colouring out of that. So next up, let's do the Grim Black first. So the Grim Black cover on the fur. And you always want to make sure you're shaking these up, because the way that the paint sits, you don't want to end up it being really watery and not actually having any of the paint luster. Quick test there, that's absolutely fine. And so you can see here the multi-tonal nature of the zenithal prime underneath. You can, even just with the speed paint on there, with the leather, it was only one colour, but it looks like I've done 2 or 3. So sticking a bit of the black on here. Start off light and then potentially build up the layers after. And what I'm going to do is do it against the grain, so the black kind of sits underneath as like the base shadow, similar to what we did when we put the red on, doing some of the dark colours, being a bit more heavy-handed with the brush underneath, the airbrush rather. I'm pretty happy with that. Have I missed anything, do you think, there?
No, not like I see.
I think that, so we've got, once that dries, you'll be able to see as it moves in the light that you'll catch the brown underneath it to give it that multi-tonal effect that you will often get with hair, because hair isn't all one colour. So I'm now going to go with the dark skin shade, which I'm going to put on the leather. So this is a wash. It even says on there, very handily, wash. So this is really super thin, but it is just to bring out the details and just to give it that kind of, almost kind of contoury nature to the leather while giving it a slight fleshy sheen. So we'll go over this bit here. Again, you can be fairly gentle with it, because you don't want too much. But as you can see, as I'm going over there, it's just adding a bit of depth to the colour, while also giving it a slight sheen to add to the leathery quality that we are looking for. So just a quick go over on this side, and then carefully turn it, and I'll do the leather while I've got it in this position. Do the wash on the leather on this arm. Again, if you are at all uneasy about using your airbrush to paint slightly closer to edges or slightly finer details or areas where there might be a higher risk of overspray on something you don't want the paint on, mask it. There are masking putties and masking fluids. We sell here at the Airbrush Company a masking putty for about a tenner for a tub, and it's reusable. So it's like the old school silly putty. Anyone who's of a similar generation to Rich and I will remember silly putty. You didn't use that once and throw it away. It's the same thing. You can mold it to the shape that you want, spray on there. If you get paint on it, doesn't matter. You just roll it back into a ball, stick it back in your tin, and it's ready to use next time you need it. So I'm just going over on this side now, getting a decent amount of this wash on there and just making sure that I haven't missed any bits. And I think that will do for the wash. Where I've put the dark skin shade, a couple of areas I want to put a bit more where I want it to be a little darker, but actually that's then really brought out the contrast on there. Now I've done the satchel brown, grim black and dark skin shade covers on the leather and the fur. I'm now going to put a little bit of pallid bone. I'm not sure I'm going to need a huge amount of this one. And with this pallid bone colour, I'm going to put a little bit on the skull on the front and a little bit on the horns. So as we paint this on, and then I'll put a little bit over on the horns. With using the airbrush, avoiding overspray, spray away from the base colour that you're wanting to maintain, and it just makes it that much easier to use the airbrush for the coverage that you want while not covering things that you don't want that colour too much accidentally. But again, if you do overspray, it's not the end of the world. It's very straightforward to just do a little bit more with the paintbrush, which with this pallid bone as the base, I will still be doing a fair amount of dry brushing to add that textured effect that you get with tiefling horns. So that only needed a small amount, and as you can see very quickly, it's really added to the detail on that skull mask. Just give it a little more, just to give it more depth to that colour, and a little bit more on the sides there, just to really bring that out. And actually that's come up really nicely, and that's come up beautifully. I'm going to put a little bit more on the horns here, but not too much because I don't want to overspray accidentally. Got some on the horns there. A little bit later on we're going to do a bit of dry brushing with some of the Army Painter air paints. Now finally I'm going to add some broadsword silver, which if I remember rightly, that's Gravelord Grey. There we go, some broadsword silver. I'm just going to flush out the rest of the pallid bone. And then pop in my broadsword silver. With the overspray, you just want to be really careful. And as you're noticing, I may be using a Spar Max Max 4, which is a 0.4mm needle and nozzle. I'm still able to get some really nice detail and really nice fine lines on it while not losing any of the definition at all. And that's helped not just by the speed paints, but also by the control you have over the dual action trigger. Give that a second to dry, and I'm going to do something very similar to Rich, which is I'm going to turn one of the speed paints into more of a wash, and we're going to do a really nice little blue wash over that sword. I think we will go with, what do you reckon? Should we go with a plasmatic bolt, which is more of a turquoisey colour, a magic blue, which is a more royally bright blue, Beowulf blue, which I quite like the name of it. Or I think there's one more. There's a Cloudburst blue, which is more of a grey.
Magic blue, watered down, will be quite nice.
Magic blue. You know what? I will take your lead on it. You have far more experience painting models than I do. So give it a good old shake, because this magic blue is a brand spanking new bottle. So this is the first time I'm using this colour. I'm going to chuck some of this into my cup. Not too much, because I'm not going to be using very much of it. And then I'm going to use some of the airbrush medium. You can just use water when you're using a wash, but with the medium it still retains a large majority of the luster of the colour. I'm putting a lot more thinner in there than you otherwise would. Even with the speed paints, you don't generally want to use any thinner anyway. But just give it a little mix. It's going to be really bubbly, really, really wet, but I'm literally just using it to almost kind of the same way that I use the dark skin shade on the leather. I just want it to be really, really thin, just to give a nice sheen, if you like, of the blue. And just along one edge. You don't want to do the whole thing, because it's literally just using it as a contrast. And you can see there, it's very, very subtly there. But you've got a nice, I'm going to do a little bit more from the top. That's a nice little contrast against it. And it blends really beautifully because it's watered down. So you've got contrast against the silver and the blue on the edge. Just want to put a little bit more on the very end of it there. And there we go, that's all we need. So, Rich, are you ready? We're going to do some cleaning now.
Rock and roll.
I've used a few more colours on my Tiefling than have been used by Rich on the Giant, just because I have larger surface areas that are going to be different colours. What we'll be doing with the Giant will be majority fine work with a paintbrush, which will come shortly. What we need to do now though is clean Richard's airbrush. Now, I know for a fact that Richard has used airbrushes before. I know for a fact that he claims to have cleaned airbrushes before, but what we're going to do is just talk him through the best practice to make sure that his airbrush is properly clean, ready for the next session. Even though we do have some of the Army Painter cleaner, what I'm going to do is use the cleaner that comes with the Iwata cleaning kit, which is the Medea airbrush cleaner. We sell that here at the Airbrush Company. Bottles 4 ounce, 8 ounce, 16 and 32. So basically a litre, half litre, quarter litre and 1/8 of a litre. So here you go. What we first need to do, good work, you've opened it up, pop a little bit of cleaner in. With the small cup you're not going to need a huge amount. With your cleaning brush, any brush will work for this, but what I would suggest is if you have one brush designated just for cleaning, we use brushes like this, which are about 1.5 centimetres long. They're fine, but slightly coarse bristles, which means that you're not going to damage anything by using them, but they're coarse enough to actually get some of the dirt and detritus off from the inside of your cup. So what you can see Rich is doing here, he's working that cleaner around the cup, getting all around the edges, making sure that all of those bits of paint on the sides of the cup are away, and then he's going to dump that out. We've got a bin down here. If you get a cup or just anything you're happy to just chuck the paint into, if you're doing your painting by a window and you're happy to chuck it out the window, it doesn't matter where it goes as long as it doesn't go through the nozzle. Once you've done that and worked it a bit, do it again. Anytime you're using the brush to get paint off the sides of the cup of the airbrush, you do not want to send that through the nozzle because you're dislodging dry paint which the second it goes anywhere near your nozzle, you are running the risk of causing a blockage unnecessarily. Once you're happy that it's clear, put another bit of cleaner in. Perfect. And then with our spray out pots here, I want to do the spray out pots with that work with a hanger. You buy them separately. The hanger fixes to your table, and the cleaning pot or spray out pot attaches to the hanger. It means that if you are clumsy like me, and let's be honest, clumsy like Rich as well, you don't have to worry about knocking them off. Sparmax also do the pots and the hangers. They don't attach to one another, but they work just in the same way. And they're, again, like with the Sparmax Max 4, if you're on a slightly lower budget but you still want to have the decent kit, Sparmax is the way to go, and they come in a little bit cheaper. So Rich is just spraying the cleaner through the airbrush, so to get anything out of the nozzle that might still be in there. It's going to just do a quick wipe, and if you don't want to spray a little bit onto that cloth to see if it's coming out clear, then you're good to go. Before we do this bit, on earlier videos I showed you taking the airbrush completely apart to clean. You don't need to do that very regularly at all. Once a month at most, to take it apart and make sure every single part is clean. You don't need to be taking your airbrush apart particularly frequently. You certainly don't need to be taking the inner workings out of the back. The majority of the cleaning is happening from the trigger forward. From the trigger here and forwards from there, that's the only area there should be paint. If there's paint back here and you're having to clean it, it means you haven't cleaned it right, or there's a blockage and it's sent paint backwards. Now we are certain that it's spraying clear. It means that the needle is clean. We're going to take the back off the airbrush. So if you unscrew that, it does have a cutaway, and that's good for quick flush throughs. But what we're going to want to do is put a bit of reamer through the nozzle. So we're going to retract the needle a bit, not taking it all the way out. We're going to retract it so it's no longer inside the cup, but only just not inside the cup. Because then what we're going to do with our reamer, you put the end of the straw into the hole at the bottom of the cup where the paint will flow, and then spray through. If that comes out in a clear stream, you know for a fact you haven't got a blockage. Once you're happy that that's gone through clear, you put your needle back in, tighten the chucking nut. If you give it a quick test just to show that the needle is moving, so you've tightened the chucking nut enough, which he has, then you pop the back of the airbrush on. And if you want to pop a little bit of water in there and spray a little bit on the cloth just to make sure you've got no reamer left sitting in your airbrush. And you see there, even with the reamer, and as he's sprayed onto the cloth, the little bits that were on the end of the nozzle are clear. What we'll do now as a final step is we're going to remove the airline and unscrew the nozzle cap and needle cap together. Pop the airbrush down carefully. The nozzle is one of the most fragile parts, second only to the needle. We want to try to interact with the nozzle as little as possible. We want to interact with the nozzle as infrequently as possible. So in order to do that, we need to make sure that we are being careful when putting it down. So with the cap in hand, we're going to put a little bit of cleaner onto it. Because with the airbrush, as you do some spraying, you'll be able to see on mine that I haven't yet cleaned this, and I've got a little bit of the paint on the inside there, because as it's spraying, it is going to kind of fan out. So you'll want to make sure you get all the paint off that. If you unscrew them so they're no longer attached to one another. And then with one of the interdentals from our cleaning kit, just want to get in there to make sure that you've got nothing left on the nozzle cap, because if you have any paint left at this point, you've already started a blockage even after the nozzle. But if you pop that down and just check that the end cap is clear of paint, if you need to work it with the interdental or your cleaning brush,
All good.
but if it's all good, put them back onto your airbrush. If you do find you have a little bit of paint on there, I would suggest using your cleaning brush and moving away in the direction of the point. because as soon as you start going towards the point, you're going to end up potentially damaging the nozzle or getting some of the bristles stuck in. Once you're happy with that, job done. And that is all you need to do for a really thorough clean. You can do quick colour change cleans, which we did demonstrate how quickly those can be done. But what we will be able to show you a little bit later is how quick those can be done, and I'll be able to show you that when we come to doing my airbrush. I'll show you a quick colour change clean, and then I'll do again the same clean that has been done with Rich's. And that's all there is to it, and that is start to finish using the Iwata HP BH airbrush. Now we've cleaned the HP BH that Rich was using, it's time to clean the Sparmax Max 4. As with the Iwatas, it's built with the same standard components, with the trigger, the needle, and with the gravity fed cup, makes this process nice and straightforward. So what we're going to do first, grab our standard airbrush cleaner, pop a little bit in the cup, and then with our cleaning brush, we'll go in there and give that a work around, making sure we get as much of the paint residue off the sides of the cup to avoid getting them into the nozzle. And then we dump that out, making sure that we get as much of that out as possible. Pop a little bit more cleaner in, and this time we will do a bubble back. So using a microfiber cloth, cover the nozzle and give it bubble. You'll see that it's bubbling up inside the cup, sending it through, so anything that's left inside the nozzle will come out. And then again, we want to dump that out into our cup. This time, put a little bit of water in. And again, give that a work around, making sure that we are just working as much of that as we can into and around the cup. And do one final dump out. And then this time, pop either a bit of water or a bit of cleaner, just depending on how dirty your airbrush has gotten. And then with our spray out pop, you can also do this just straight onto a bit of scrap paper or onto some paper towels, but if you do it this way, it saves the mess. And then we just send all of that in there. You can see just there, slowly going down. That's just flushing through some of the remaining cleaner and the water through there. You want to just get as much of the paint residue away from your needle as possible, because the less you have to do on the back end of the airbrush, the better. So the inside of the cup there is looking pretty good. What I am going to do is pop a little bit of the reamer just onto the sides there, and again using the brush, making sure to keep it tilted because you don't want any of the reamer to go into the back of the airbrush. Just use that reamer to get the bulk of the paint drips and the dry paint that's around the cup. Then pop a little bit of cleaner in, and again be sure to dump that out. You don't want to be sending reamer at this stage through your nozzle. Use this water just to neutralise any of the reamer that's left remaining. And dump that out. What we're going to do now is have a little look at our needle and nozzle caps there. You can see there's a fair amount of paint. So we'll take those off and clean those separately. These you will want to make sure are off before you start popping cleaner and the like in there, because if you then go in with your brush, you could end up causing damage inadvertently to your nozzle, which is the last thing you want to do. So as you've got your brush handy, again work that around, just making sure you get any and all dry paint off the sides. Again, if there's a bit of dry paint on there, you can use this opportunity to pop a little bit of your reamer into the end. It will spatter about a little bit, but that's not the end of the world. Just want to get it on there so you can make sure that any and all paint that's left on there is off. And then I use a cotton bud, but very carefully, because you don't want to do transfer any fibres. just go around the outside, just make sure, look at that, completely clean, completely clear. Take the cap completely off, and this is the nozzle cap. This is the bit where the nozzle will protrude or go right up to the line. Certainly when you've got it onto your airbrush, your needle will also be sticking out there a little bit. And with the cleaner that's already on your brush, if you need to add a little bit more, absolutely do. Just give that a good once over. And again, from the other side, just to make sure you remove any excess paint residue that could be hanging about, because we don't want to leave any paint to dry inside your airbrush. Like that. What I'm going to do at this stage, pop these down and just inspect the needle and nozzle there. It does look like that's fairly clear, but what I will do is take the back off the airbrush, loosen the chucking nut, and I'm going to remove the needle. There is still some paint on there, which is absolutely fine. What I'm going to do is grab a cloth, pop a little bit of reamer on the cloth, pop the needle into there, making sure you pinch at one of the widest points and slowly twisting side to side, pull it back through the cloth, making sure that you're getting a decent amount of that reamer transferred to get your airbrush needle nice and clear. And that is basically clear. Just give it another pass. And just to inspect it, make sure that while spraying you haven't been a little bit too heavy-handed with it. You can use one of the LED magnifiers that come with the Iwata cleaning kit and just inspect it there. Now you're obviously not going to be able to see it as clearly on here as I can, but I can tell you that that needle is in absolutely fine condition. What I will now want to do is pop the needle down, pop the nozzle and needle cap back on, having inspected the nozzle to make sure there's no paint on it. We pop this cap back on again. All of the parts that are threaded that you'll screw on, you want to make sure that they are hand tightened only. If you over tighten them and you can't get them off, that can cause damage to the threading, which will then in turn cause damage to your overall air seal. Now I've got the nozzle cap and needle cap back on, I'm going to take my reamer and pop it directly into the cup, and you can see there's a little well at the very bottom where the paint will flow. Pop the end of the reamer into that and then into anything you've got for spraying out. I'm just using a bin to the side here to make sure that this is going straight out. Now we have had some paint transfer on the needle, so what I'm going to do on this occasion, I'm going to take the back of the airbrush off. Now, as we did with the airbrush Rich was using, we did a standard flush through, make it clean, which was absolutely sufficient for keeping your airbrush in good working order. Should you have a longer painting session, you will want to just make sure that you've got nothing that's gone back into the airbrush, and also if you've had paint transfer, the likelihood is you will have some paint in your chucking guide just here. So what we want to do, after making sure you've got a bit more of the reamer on your needle, you can use the flat end and carefully pass it backwards through your chucking guide just to check for any paint transfer that there may be there. Do that once or twice just to make sure, because any paint that is still in the inside of your needle guide and your chucking guide, there we go, we've got a little bit of paint transfer there. So again, with your cloth, give that a wipe through. What I'm going to do now is with a cloth, which I'm going to use actually the microfiber one, because you want to avoid getting anything fibrous on the inside of your airbrush, because that can catch and that can be a place for paint to accumulate and ultimately block your airbrush, which is what we are aiming to avoid generally with all of it. Because the more you have on that end of your airbrush, the more likely you are to block the nozzle, and that's far more difficult to sort than just being a bit more careful with the clean. There's a little bit of paint left on the inside of the cup, so with my microfiber cloth, give that a little go round, and you can see there that to my eye looks absolutely fine. There's still a stubborn little bit, but this is the perfect opportunity. Get your cleaning brush again. If you've still got a bit of cleaner on, which I can see that I have, you just give that another little once over, just to make sure that you are getting anything off. After an inspection, you can see it's absolutely fine. No paint transfer has happened, so there's been no blockage while spraying, so there's nothing on the inside of the airbrush. We're now going to put it back together. So we've got the trigger. What I'm going to do before I put the trigger back into the airbrush is just apply a small amount of the lubricant, again that comes with the water cleaning kit that I'm using here. Pop a tiny little dot of it just on the end where the trigger connects with the piston. With this Sparmax one, you've got the two pins on the side that lead it in, so you put it in sideways and turn it, and then you have two little runners on the inside just above the piston, so you place it in. You can see there that is in place. Work it a little bit to make sure some of that lube gets worked into the piston channel and the piston housing. And then next we want to put in our chucking guide. So like if you think of it as a boot, you want to push the heel backwards and then put the foot of the chucking guide in, make sure the toes of it are sticking out and curling back and away from your trigger. Then we pop the spring back on. And again, using a little bit of lube, I'll put a couple of little dots just onto the area where the spring meets the chucking guide and just work that around, because anything that's going to be moving over one another like this, you're going to want to make sure that it's got a nice easy run so you don't get anything sticking, just not generally working correctly. Pop the spring guide back on, and again with all the threaded parts on your airbrush, you want to make sure they are hand tightened because you want to be able to unscrew them again later. That is now as tight as it's going to go. Pop the chucking nut on, only with half a turn, and then making sure that we get these nice and lined up. I use two fingers just to brace against one another. Get the end of the needle into the end of the chucking nut and then carefully pass it through. As you go into the airbrush, you want to push it in until you can't push it any further. You don't want to wedge it in, it's just a gentle push, and then give it a twist to make sure that it's not stuck. Tighten up your chucking nut, and then as you do that, you can see the needle's moving back and forth freely. Grab the back of your airbrush again and tighten that on. And there we have a nice clean Sparmax Max 4. If you have any other airbrushes that you would like to see us use, or a guide for cleaning any of those airbrushes, please leave a comment in the box below, or you can email us and visit our website.